What does it mean to you? What does it mean to you to push the boundaries of public sector innovation at this time?
Mm. Thanks, Lindsay. And hi, everybody. Really nice to connect with you, and really looking forward to this journey that we are embarking on together. Um, and maybe what I would do is just invite people to really briefly just take a moment and just invite you to close your eyes. And if you'd like to take just a breath in and breath out. Um, that always helps me just to presence myself a bit more to the conversation. And yeah, I think I guess in thinking about what it means in relation to what you just shared, Lindsay, around taking a transformative approach to innovation, to me that feels like really staying very firmly oriented to what it is and defining what it is that we're moving towards, and using that as kind of like a North Star, and ensuring that kind of my actions align with what it is that I'm imagining and hoping and moving towards. And with that, I think about kind of treating every action or every moment as an opportunity for an intervention, whether that's even just like a small interaction with colleagues that in like an informal space, or a more like built out or scaled out thing such as a community of practice, or um, even just the way that we start meetings, just thinking about what can be an intervention basically at different points in time. um, and for me personally, it also looks like um, being able to be very attuned to when patterns of the dominant culture are at play, and finding ways to resist it, and then also to offer different ways of doing that are rooted in love and care for others, and embedding different ways of being and doing that are rooted in different Indigenous worldviews. For me as well, I draw a lot from Black feminist teachings, and really ensuring that those are different, that we're leading from those views and ways of being. And I think that's where like moving towards that multiplicitous and just kind of transformative space is for me, is we're not just including more into kind of the dominant framework, but rather learning and leading from these many other ways of being, and knowing and doing, in order to help us transform away from this system. So those are kind of some initial thoughts. Would love to hear what is coming up for Penny and Francisca, or any questions. Maybe you can riff off of that.
I'll go next. I think what comes to mind listening to Lily's first reflection is this idea that public innovation, doesn't just reside with the people that have that in their title, or the unit that's responsible for it. But we found in work that we did with Lindsay, where we spoke to a lot of people who are doing this work in different places of the world, that there are also people that are very much focused on working and kind of diffusing the methods and the mindsets across the public sector with their colleagues and their peers, but also outside of it. And so really bringing that expertise and those perspectives through this mindset and the lens of how do we kind of ask different questions? How do we consider a broader set of perspectives, and how that mindset doesn't just lie with the people who have supposedly been trained to do it. And so this notion that we are also have that responsibility to diffuse this capability with our colleagues and within our communities. Yes, Maggie, over to you, right? Or Penny, sorry.
So good, yeah. I'll jump in if that's okay, Maggie. Well, kia ora, everybody. I just say welcome to everyone, and lovely to have some folks here that I have connected with in other ways, and also to meet some new folks. So that's really exciting. So thank you. I'm just dialing in from Tamaki Makaurau in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So it's midday here, and I've had too many coffees, and Lily and Francesca gave these really nice, calm, centered reflections, and I'm kind of like just in a much more frenzied state, so it's probably not going to be so considered. But I just want to acknowledge what they've talked about in terms of the diffusion, and in terms of the care and kind of centering, and then I was kind of thinking of it on this almost like our technical level, the world that we're in here in terms of public sector is we're located in a particular place in community, but we then have relationships through local government and central government. And for us, the innovation space really is in connecting those worlds. And there's some technical dimensions to that, just in terms of, competencies and capabilities, and we can all kind of name, all the things that we always talk about in terms of these are the ways that we have to change the way the public sector operates. But in terms of like the felt space and the kind of centering space, it's really about reconnecting with people in place. So, our conversations about public sector or policy or ways of working aren't floating in this kind of ether, around some kind of generic conversation of people, but they're very much grounded in a particular place, in a particular history. And for us in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that's our place in the Pacific, even though historically, our entire kind of system of government is a Westminster system. It's imported. So there's a kind of reconciliation happening about the fact that we're actually in the Pacific as a nation. That's our orientation. The innovation that's already here is Māori innovation, Pacific people's innovation. And we're kind of reconciling these worlds. So that's the space that we're, I guess, vibrating in, which connects to all the things that Lee and Francesca have spoken to. So that's my two coffees and little snippet of a massive question. So thank you, Maggie.
Thanks, everyone. Maggie, do you want to jump in? Okay. I just want to, so there's something that's coming up for me as I'm listening to the three of you. Francisca and her team just hosted City Lab and the studio for people who have a job title that's something like Chief Innovation Officer in a city last week. And I was there, and Jason was there. Maybe some others on our call were there. And I just really noticed that a lot of people are really tired. Like, they're working so hard and they're so committed to what this work is, and the conditions are still really difficult. And so when we're now saying is there a way to think about transformation in a way that's not like, oh, we're asking me to do even more work that's even harder? I'm wondering if any of you have any insights into actually being more ambitious in the kinds of ways that you're describing transformation might actually also be a bit less hard, maybe? Or maybe not, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
I don't know if this is exactly what you mean, Lindsay, but for us, what's really significant, we've just had an election, and we're in a holding pattern to understand the formation of the next government. And it's a very intense time, ecologically, politically, socially, I think it is for everybody. And almost our strongest orientation when we're convening people together is care, sleep, food, like really, it's not about what else can we bring into people's spaces. It's how can we create space for people to pause and rest. So that's the way we're orientating how we convene at the moment, is caring and respecting that people are exhausted, and how can we be offering rejuvenating spaces. Yeah, Judy will know all about this. Kia ora, Judy. Yeah, so that's our orientation, is not adding, it's actually kind of nurturing, but that's not always the word that I would use in this setting, but in our, in this conversation, I would use that.
I think following on Penny's reflection, something that I heard a lot last week, Lindsay, from the folks that were at the Innovation Studio. So these practitioners from, I think they represented 110 cities from Latin America, the US, Canada, Europe primarily, was that they appreciated in the workshop the time for self-reflection, that they actually had a chance to just stop and think individually and quietly, and that was kind of part of the opportunity that they had. And I wonder if there's an aspect of that can be kind of more systematic in our daily practice even.
Yeah, I think definitely in our spaces that I'm working in, we have a pretty strong orientation towards care. And something I hear often is like this type of work feeling like it's on the side of the desk, or like an added kind of extra part of the work that wasn't necessarily a part of their original work plan. And yeah, just feeling like this kind of extra burdensome thing. And similar to, I think, what Penny was saying, is like what we're trying to do is really give people a chance to actually just slow down and do less. And I think that's part of the like resisting the tendencies of the dominant culture to just do more and do it fast and do it perfectly. And yeah, and so that looks like just spending time asking each other how we're doing in our time that we're together. It looks like actually holding like rest sessions. Like we just had a symposium for climate justice here in Vancouver, and I led a session on rest and imagination, and just gave people an hour and 45 minutes to listen to music and to rest or draw, create, because yeah, it's definitely like I think we need to just be slowing it down and tending to ourselves and to each other way more in order to kind of like unhinge ourselves from this dominant paradigm.
Thanks, everyone. I think that captures a lot of how I'm feeling about this too, is that if this like additive approach to innovation, where it's just sort of doing more and doing faster and doing as many experiments as we can, as quickly as we can, is actually it's like it feels like it's not it's a thing to be doing, and if it's not the only thing to be doing. And I think for me, I'm really curious about entering into while that continues to be a part of many people's practice of public innovation, because the conditions for their work are demanding them to work that way, how can we also be cultivating conditions to be thinking about what we're doing in some different ways? So thank you all for that. If anyone has any reflections, comments that you'd like to throw in your own ideas about pushing the boundaries of practice at this time, please feel free to drop those in the chat, or pick up on something that Penny or Lily or Francisca says, and we can bring that in. But maybe I'll move us along to our second prompt. Penny, you're going to start us off with. How do you think about the entanglements between personal, inner, and systems outer transformation in your work? And why is this important for public sector innovation? I'll read it one more time just for everybody. How do you think about the entanglements between personal inner and systems outer transformation in your work? And why is this important for public sector innovation?
Thanks, Lindsay. Again, this is something that I have feelings and ideas about, and then haven't completely nailed how we articulate this, because that's the whole point of this community, of having a community of practice around this question. So bear with me. I think one of the tensions that we've been exploring in our work as we walk alongside other public sector colleagues who are undertaking significant reform and have a mandate to try and realize some kind of ambitious strategy or policy or program of work, of change. And we're talking about, whatever language you kind of want to use, we're talking about some form of systems transformation where we're expecting the patterns of behaviors and structures to change quite radically, right? Like, we're not going to get to these aspirational outcomes that we've named, whether it be for child wellbeing or climate change, unless there's some really significant shifts in how we do and be and how our structures support that. But the public sector kind of, as a general rule, operates on a sort of like, you're not bringing yourself to work, you're just going to work and doing your job. And if you're good at your job, the outputs will just come and you'll sort of turn up and do your thing. And we know that's totally not going to get us to anywhere different. And so the tension for us has been supporting change that is at a systems level, which means it's the processes and practices and structures, but also that doesn't change unless there's shifts at individual human levels as well. And so you have to hold both of those things, where yes, we want to shift the system, but it turns out to do that, we've got to do a bunch of really challenging, confrontational stuff that digs really deep into our humanness and our sense of value. And you can't always do that explicitly, because you might, because that's not necessarily when a change process is being commissioned. Often we're either thinking about, we're going to just implement a systems change, or we're doing some kind of workforce capability thing, and they're kind of seen as separate. And workforce capability names an investment into people, but it doesn't name the sort of shifts that we're talking about. And so I think we're trying to form a language and a way of talking about that when we're doing systems transformation work. Yes, we're shifting systems and practices, but to get that to meaningfully happen, we're also journeying at an individual level. And we're trying to bring those worlds together. So it's not just individuals going and having really great deepening experiences, because if that individual just has that and then goes back into a system that hasn't changed, often their response is to leave. They've changed themselves, but the system they're working in hasn't changed, and there's a values misalignment then. So how can we be working with the individuals, but also trying to shift the values of the system at the same time, which is, we call it implementation learning, but that's just a word that we made up to try and bring those worlds together, that we're trying to do the change and the implementation at the same time, not separately. So it's the tension between those two things, that we can't just be doing development at an individual level, we have to be developing the system at the same time, but those things aren't separate. So we have to be also grappling with things about identity, history, trauma, context, culture at a human level at the same time as we're doing it at a systems level. So it was my first attempt to try and articulate that out loud. So I'll try and improve on that next time. But thank you.
Honey, I feel like that was great. Just like a mic drop would be appropriate, I think. Yeah, I feel like I resonate so much with everything that Penny just said. And I think what I would add is like like this idea of kind of like working on ourselves, working at different basic like fractal levels, and ourselves being fractals of the system that we're operating in, and what happens kind of internally or personally with us is reflected and projected outwardly. And we're all kind of having different reactions or experiences of what the system is doing, whether it's negatively impacting us, or we're receiving some sort of benefit from it, or maybe it's both of those things at the same time. And so I think it's a matter of like wrestling with that like micro and macro scale, and also being able to be attuned to when that's happening or what's happening at what points. And like I find myself kind of naming things that are stuck in a certain system, but then realize that my way of thinking about things is actually also part of the stuckness. And so I think it's like this real like muscle of developing this awareness to kind of what is what's happening, like impacting me in a certain way, and what's my reaction to it, and why is that happening, as well as when that's happening for other folks in the system. And so, yeah, I think it's about tending to the personal as well as the systemic in order to like work our way through that kind of uneasiness when it comes to transformative work. Yeah.
I'll add something from a conversation I think we had in preparation for that event that Lindsay was noting, and we were talking to one of our speakers and getting prepared, and we said we were characterizing the participants as people who are leading these important changes in their cities, and something that he said, people need to, who are in these roles in the public sector, need to recognize that they're stepping into roles that in some cases and depending on where you are, in most cases haven't particularly served communities well, and just recognizing that, and that the transformations that those roles have the capacity to generate have profound impacts on people's lives. They can either be enablers or generate deeper inequities. And so I think that's kind of my take on the personal to the systemic, and how kind of in these change-making processes, being really conscious of, prior harm, and then potential for change, and kind of who benefits and who potentially doesn't, and how do you consider the safeguards for those who could be negatively impacted, and to really try to mitigate those risks as much as possible.
Thanks, everyone. I'm wondering, and Penny, you and I have talked a lot about this, and Lily and I as well. And I'd invite Shagufta and Jen if you want to jump in on this too. Thanks for your comments in the chat. But I'm curious about, like, in my experience, usually we're expected to do the outer work, right? We're expected to solve problems, prototype things, run events, do like all the things that we're meant to do. And I've found I've had to be sneaky about the inner work. Right? Like, people don't think they're signing up for that, or when they realize that that's going on, they might resist it, or I don't have permission to do that kind of work, or it's not seen as important or valued or essential. So I'm curious if any or all of you have insights about how you do that, how you kind of cultivate that inner work in spite of the difficulties of doing that in lots of cases.
I have thoughts. So maybe I'll introduce myself because I know a couple of people on this call, but most people are new. So my name is Shagufta, and I used to work in the public sector, and I'm calling from Vancouver, and I worked at a public agency that deals with social housing for a couple of years. And then after a couple of years, I went back into my private consulting practice. I'm an urban planner by training. And so I do like leadership coaching and equity coaching and facilitation sort of alongside the public sector, a lot of times with leaders who are like, I feel very stuck. We are alongside a process. Please help our team come in, or please come in and help our team. And what I find is that both in my experience when I was in the public and outside is it's true that there is a focus on the external, but the internal shows up in when we get to a level where like it's not an information problem, it's that we're actually showing up in ways that are deeply siloed, that are like it's hard to share, there's protection of our work, there's all kinds of things. And so that's where we have to draw on somatic tools. We have to draw on like the grief that we have around the climate. We have grief around our organization's history. We have grief around many different things. I have a background also as a birth and postpartum doula. And I really find we're like birthing new ways of being and so I like think of myself as an organizational doula a lot of the time, where I'm like, okay, this is where we were, and how do we get to this other place? Because collectively, we individually are holding somatic shapes, but like collectively, we're also holding a shape. And sometimes we need to name it so that we can just like push through it and take on a different shape and practice doing that, because we're like always, we talked about fractals, but we're always practicing something. And so because there is like, I feel like since in these past couple of years, there's been a deeper recognition of our self, the way it's showing up is shaping the external impacts. And so it's like almost safer to talk about the internal work depending on context and sometimes in smaller groups, and then you can have like a broader organization conversation. But this window of like the pandemic and the ongoing pandemic has given us, I think, more permission to do this kind of work than we had before. At least that's been my experience. And sometimes you need to be really sneaky and just call it something else, not inner work. You call it like thinking through the way we show up as a team, or thinking through like the stuff we hold on. Like we can't call it inner work, we call it something else, and then that helps.
I might chime in here, and I love your organizational doula comment. And last week I met an innovation midwife, and so I could share more about that too. But that does kind of lead to my comment around, I think, leveraging our Indigenous allies that are working with us in a lot of these group processes to give permission to do that inner work. I find often it does have to be sneaked in, but when we have Indigenous people helping with our events, opening the events, holding space in the events for the inner work and inner reflection and focus on healing, it creates permission in these really institutional settings that have committed to reconciliation and committed to taking the lead of Indigenous leaders. And so that's an entry point, I think, for sneaking in the inner work.
Thanks, Shagufta and Annalisa. Jen, were you wanting to jump in? Hey, Jen, nice to see you.
Hi, Lindsay. So nice to see you too. Hello, everyone. My name's Jen Mayer. I'm calling in from the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation in what is known as the town of Comox on Vancouver Island. I just maybe building on some of what has been shared around the kind of sneaky ways maybe that we're able to bring in this work, and what you were just talking about, Annalisa, working with First Nations and Indigenous folks. And one of the structures actually that I've used somewhat sneakily is circle practice. And that has been in partnership, actually, like as a co-facilitator sometimes with somebody who is Indigenous. And we actually taught a bunch of public servants how to use circle practice, and then started a community of practice where people can just come and be in circle. And so we've introduced ways, even as a non-Indigenous person, to kind of invoke or call upon this deep practice that goes back even into Northern European kind of lineages, as a way to offer the space for that more relational way of being, to offer the space to really invite that reflectiveness and that inner and outer work into in this case into the provincial government. And I feel like it's such long-term work in many ways. Like, we're still waiting to see all the ripples, but I feel like some of the early feedback of the ripples has been really positive.
Thanks, Jen. Also, the dissident and skeptical voices welcome here too. So if you're listening and feeling like, wow, I can't imagine this in my context at all, or this sounds impossible, we welcome hearing about that too, because we know that, like, I think I know that all of us who have spoke on this have struggled with this practice a lot, even though we may sound like we know what we're doing. So I know that we struggle with it in an ongoing way and know how difficult it is. So just welcome that in whatever, the slides are there if you want to be a little more anonymous about it, the chat's there. So if there's something that's coming up that you're finding you're like not seeing as possible, or other feelings like that, that's welcome here too. I just want to see Penny, Lily, Francisca, or Maggie. Do you want to add anything to that prompt around inner and outer work before we move on to the third prompt? Okay. Okay, Francisca, you're up to begin to kick us off with this one. So the third one is, what competencies and capabilities are most important for people in the public sector to practice and grow when working toward transformation?
Well, thank you, Lindsay. So I think there's definitely not one answer, but just based on the conversations that I had alluded to earlier in the session that Lindsay and I had, along with two of my colleagues, Taryn Smith and Justin Ensminger, when we were talking to people who are leading this work all over the place, what we heard repeatedly was that the practitioners who are doing innovation work, the ones who are doing it effectively, have very strong soft skills. They are the ones who are able to build empathy. They really value building trust and relationships with people both within government but outside of government. They are good listeners, and they're inquisitive. They are asking unusual questions. They also have a capacity to be very creative, or they are able to learn creativity. So it doesn't have to be an innate skill. And the other thing that we also heard a lot is that they have a capacity for synthesis, to synthesize and to really kind of connect dots that maybe others in their silos don't have the mandate, the perspective, the mindset to be able to connect. So, they have this, I think also with the soft skills, they have this capacity to like balance across the stakeholders who are involved in a change-making process as well. So I think this was maybe not, I wouldn't say surprising, but there had, I think, traditionally has been such a strong link between innovation and technology or the capacity to, manage and analyze data. And yes, those were also skills. And what we know as well is that the people who are doing innovation in the public sector, they're multidisciplinary teams. There isn't one person that kind of has all the capabilities. And they complement each other, right? And so they can ask the questions, they can do data analysis when they need to. That can be either quantitative or qualitative. But the thing that came out the strongest and the thing that we heard over again was the soft skills. And that those were the things that people were like, I can't teach soft skills. I can teach all the other things. But empathy, the ability to listen and to respect the people who need to be involved in the process and build trust and relationships, that was the kind of across the board what we heard most often as kind of core to this type of work. And Lindsay, if I missed anything from that, let me know. I don't know, does that resonate with folks?
I'm wondering too, Lillian and Penny, feel free to jump in on that prompt more generally. And I also feel like the ways that the people who think of themselves or call themselves or identify with the label of public innovator in the public sector, I feel like the competencies and capacities have changed quite a bit in the last even 2 or 3 years, let alone the last 10 years. So I'm wondering if, Penny, you've been in this space for a really long time, like even in your own practice, what were the skills that you thought were needed when you first began compared to what they are now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's like the proper answer and then the real answer almost, or something. I mean, for us, for sure, when we were brought into the space, like our name is the Co-Design Lab, and we've kind of left that language behind a long time ago, but we've still got the name. And the emphasis was really, innovation, the sort of like do stuff fast, make things, try things out, fail fast, and then a lot also about participation and working with communities and involving communities, and the design process, the co-design process, was very much what people wanted to learn. I mean, it was pretty quick for us to kind of go, actually, this is almost dangerous, because the depth to actually genuinely hold those spaces, it just isn't available to most people. And where we've ended up traveling, I think, is less about those kind of technical innovation skills. Although I think I totally support the types of competencies that Francisca was describing. The journey that we've been on is to go, you know what, unless people are really, because in our context, and in a kind of social justice or ecological justice context, you only take one half of a footstep before you run into the challenges of structural racism and colonization in Aotearoa. And it doesn't matter where you started the conversation, it doesn't matter which doorway you kind of entered into, what complex problem you were invited to discuss. Those are the immediate things we have to grapple with. And so how do we support folks to feel comfortable with what we started to call foundational practices? What are those foundational practices of being able to hold the big and the little at once, being able to understand that we do have to hold history and what's been before and what trauma is sitting in a place in order for us to move forward. There's no sort of clean slate of innovation where you're just trying stuff. But once you start to invite people to think about that and take on that scope, quite legitimately, that's really overwhelming. And, I quite regularly feel like crawling under my desk and just lying down, because it's like, if you hold on to everything, it's too many things to hold on to. So how do you also have that space, but be able to kind of move between the scale of the big and the little so that you don't feel paralyzed in order to be able to act, but you still are acting within the context. And like, for example, design, when I first started teaching kind of design skills like a million years ago, scope was an important thing. Like, you'd scope so that you could kind of understand. And I don't believe that at all now. I think this idea of scope is really dangerous, because that's a way of trying to pretend that complexity isn't there and kind of box off your thing and not connect with any of the interrelations. So trying to get people to not de-scope stuff, but maybe be creative about how they're talking about that to whoever's commissioned to work for them, because people are always worried about stuff getting bigger than Ben-Hur, or we can't deal with that issue, it's too complex and it's too many other agencies' responsibility, let's just deal with this issue. And that mindset's just caught us in a loop of just dealing with crisis stuff and never dealing with things in an interconnected way. So and kind of to the point that others have made, this is very much a Western, or Pākehā, which is the term for people of European descent here. That's a Western problem. You don't have that problem of thinking in interconnected ways if you're seeing the world through a Māori worldview. So it's also making sure that you're kind of acknowledging where those challenges are coming from. Yeah, that's probably enough. I could speak more on this, but I'll hand to someone.
Ben just dropped a question for you in the chat. Ben, can you say it out loud right now? Are you in a spot where you can do that, or do you want me to read it?
I can. And yeah, Kamhi kia koe, Penny, as well, always for the reflections. Always enjoy hearing the conversation. Yeah, I was just sort of asking on that scope thing, because I'd say my initial reaction on that was kind of like, and again, that's just being purely buried in a project at the moment, and actually scope can be helpful, obviously, in terms of keeping people focused, or actually knowing where you can help parts of the business to kind of leave you alone if people are sort of trying to take you too much off track on that. But actually, I was just wondering on that, actually, is around some of that language, actually, would us talking more about outcomes, and I mean, if I think about, say, even some of the contracting models and that kind of stuff, rather than, if we were talking more about outcomes rather than outputs, would that be helpful or a start? Or again, tell me I'm completely on the wrong track on this.
I'm very empathetic to what you're saying, Ben. I mean, usually the way I describe it is we've got to be doing multiple things at once. And if we're up for this work, we're up for doing at least 3 or 4 jobs at once, right? And so you've always got an initiative that you have to deliver. That's the inevitable thing. It's this relentless railway of delivery, right? And it's like that's the reality. How do you create a parallel line that lets the delivery go through, but still has a parallel stream of stuff that's picking up the more systemic things? So it's almost like, yeah, I've got to do this, otherwise, I don't know, the project gets shut down, everyone loses their job, and then we lose the opportunity to try and change stuff. But a project is just one cycle. So it's like you've got the long-term stuff where you're connecting the dots between things, and you're always still shining the light, I reckon. But you're right. Like, you have to have boundaries in order to be able to proceed. But that doesn't mean, I think what we used to do is go, oh, that's just out of scope. We'll just put it away over there, as opposed to going, the opportunity to address that isn't right now, but I'm still going to keep it here, and I'm still going to show it, talk about it, push it up to you, and make it real. And over time, you build it in each time, the better opportunity to be able to address that longer term stuff. And I think there's great examples of where people have done that, where people have stuck to the long term, and eventually over time, actually stuff's really different. People are starting in very different places, but it's taken that. So I think it's the parallel universe. That's the way I visualize it in my head.
Also, I think, and even if you wanted to, if you've got any hardcore project management practitioners on the call, I'm not one of them, by the way. But even even the traditional thing, if you go back and look at a lot of those ones, is that you're actually supposed to be learning as you're going. You technically get to a stage gate in a project, and it's like, well, are we still working towards the same thing? What have we learned along the way? And every single piece of work I've been in, whether it's been digital or not, is that you will invariably find things out along the way that it's just like, actually, we hadn't even thought about that, or actually, what we thought was a good idea over here, actually 3 months in, we know it's just we need to cut the ties on that. So as you say, there's always got to be that opportunity to be able to do things in parallel. And in fact, some of that stuff you might want to do in terms of, again, it comes back to that outcome. It's like, can we bring this back to what is it we're actually trying to achieve here, people, and more importantly, who are we trying to do it for? Is this we're actually doing this for the people in the community, or is this about somebody getting themselves in front of the minister? And that should be the last bloody reason we should be doing things. I'm saying this standing in the middle of an open plan office, so if you don't see me next week, then you'll know why. But
Thanks, Ben. I'll just read what Judy's written into the chat here, because I don't think Judy can say that out loud. Wondering if the challenge is doing something big enough without doing something so big that it falls over. I know, Lily, you think about fractals a lot, and this like fractals in your work. So I wonder if you want to say anything about that. Frame this as, what is the smallest thing we can do that can make a difference, and then we can iterate better from there.
Yeah, it definitely resonates. Yeah, I think it is like, it's kind of about like following like what the readiness is in that moment to be able to do something, and like like, and what kind of size of the intervention is it, or like what kind of, like, what's the texture of the intervention? Like there's just so many different ways to think about it, I think. But yeah, I think like something that it, like, because this work can feel so overwhelming to people who are newly entering into it, like there's kind of like this, I feel like, ongoing need to like become skilled at reminding people of complexity, and reminding people of working in emergent spaces, that like things are meant to evolve and things are meant to change, and like it is about, like, I think becoming discerning about and aware of when it is that we're drawing boundaries on things. So it's not like we're drawing a boundary around this so that this is in scope and then we forget everything else, but it's like we're aware of why we're doing this, and we're also aware that this might change, and it might change tomorrow, or it might change in a few months. Like just being like so attuned and so in relationship to how this work evolves. But yeah, I think that's just like something that I feel like I've often asked myself as well, is kind of like, what's the smallest like the smallest way in which we can work on this, that we can do, like now, and not in an urgent now, but just like, what can we actually do now? Like, what is the possibility? Like, what is the opportunity that we can meet in this moment?
Thanks, Lily. I'm wondering, Sean, are you here still? Is Sean still here, or did he jump off? Oh, he jumped off. I was thinking about, I was trying to find it actually while we were chatting. There's this massive, I think it was Nesta that made this innovation skills map a few years ago. Penny, maybe you know the one, maybe you were part of it. But it's this, they've got 4 different circles with different types of skills, but there's probably 200 different methods in there, different like skills. And so I'm wondering if maybe you all would just comment a little bit about this. Capacities versus competencies. Like, how do we think about skills now? So like, because there are so many methods, so many specific skills. And then how do we think about constructing teams, being like the processes and practices of discernment about skills, those more the competencies and capacities level of things, rather than the specific methods and tools. Because I know when I started, that orientation was really to learn some methods, like really learn some and be able to facilitate methods very well, without necessarily being as discerning as I am now. And I'm still learning how to be about what the right method is for the different contexts. So I wonder if any of you have any reflections or comments about that.
Yeah, I guess that's what I meant about the design skills and stuff. It was very methods focused. And I think, I mean, for us, it's kind of simple in a way, because everything starts with place. So, and people in place. So it just depends where you are, because where you are tells you what you need to be doing, and who gets to do it and how you do it, and whether you're the person who should even be there at all making any of those decisions. So it's our kind of framework for learning and action starts in place and says, what's the tikanga, what's the protocol here, what's the existing evidence base and knowledge system here, and then that tells you what the next action is and who's the right person to be making the decision about that. And you can draw on other things, and methods and tools may or may not be relevant to you, but that's the thing you have to start with, is kind of where am I and who's here, and what does that then mean about what comes next. And there was like a sort of moment for us, I guess, a few years ago now, but it was like that difference between a process that you put people into and starting with people and then developing a process or a rhythm is the term we would use now around that. Like, what's the right rhythm, relationship, pace for this place that we are in and what we're trying to do, as opposed to here's a process and where's the bit in which you insert, relationships and people and things like that. So yeah, but you kind of have to figure out where your feet are before you can figure out what comes next.
I wonder if anyone has a version of that from a different place, like just briefly, like what that means for you from a different, what Penny described, but from a different place. It's interesting, Penny, I think, because I feel like not everyone in this work at this time has access to the knowledges that you described coming from place in the way that you're practicing it. So there's a lot for us to learn from what's happening where you are. And I think there might be some difficulty in translating it into other contexts that are just more disconnected, right? Or don't have strong relationships with people that are rooted and grounded in place. Public sector has a history of harming those connections, harming those relationships. So it's not easy, right? I don't know if you have like a story from where you are that might help others understand like what the path, what some wayfinding, I guess, from where they may be to where you are now.
I'm not going to offer any like golden things. I'm interested to hear others' thoughts, but I mean, I think it's still something that we're trying to understand and work with when people start thinking about at a national level, like, because people still find it very hard when they're operating in aggregate to be confronted by the idea that everything's different in all places. Like those things are still really, even though that's obviously painfully true, it's difficult for people who are responsible for making decisions in aggregate to hold that. But I still think that there's a question of scales and how scale is nested. And it, like one of the maturity cycles for us was it's not about all our central government public servant colleagues who mostly all reside in one place, which is where, the kind of heart of government is here. It's not about those folks needing to make a whole lot of connections in community. That's not what that's about. Connections and relationships in place can be held locally, but you need to have the capacity to support others to have local connections. So your role changes from making decisions on behalf of those in particular places to being able to facilitate a system where localized decision making becomes possible. So it's not that you have to become local somehow or have your, know all the communities deeply, because that just ends up being a helicoptering in sort of situation. But you can operate in a way that fosters the relationships and values the relationships of others in networks and in locality. But I'll have to think about that more. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but I'll have to think about that more. And I mean, Judy would probably have some reflections here too when she gets to an internet connection that lets her be able to speak.
I think, Penny, what you said really resonated and brings to mind sort of this idea of having containers, that allow for the diversity of place. So from the public sector, when we're working at a very large scale of multiple localities and trying to support things at scale, how do we create a container that is deployed at a local level, but isn't a cookie cutter in every local level, but somehow can be represented as a cookie cutter at a higher level of sort of amalgamation. And so I think that does take a lot of, it takes a public sector organization that's willing to sort of divest a bit of power and cede a lot of trust for that community leadership and place-based approach to kind of actually take root and to go somewhere and to be sustained and to sustain the commitment from the public sector to support that effort as well.
Thanks, Annalisa. Thanks, Penny, for letting me ask you a hard question on the spot like that. I appreciate that. So I'm gonna move us to a close here. As I said, I know a couple of our co-hosts have to jump off right at 1:15 the hour, but a few of us can stay on if anybody has anything that they want to chat through afterwards. And I just want to there's one other comment here in the slides from that last prompt, which I think is a nice way to close that conversation. The people that I know in the public sector who practice and grow towards transformation have, in my experience, a deep belief that the people who need services should not miss out because the systems get in the way of delivery. They then work tirelessly to ensure these communities get the services that they are entitled to, and that this can be very hard to do, take a lot of energy, commitment, and often bravery. So it's very true. Thank you for that. So I'll just maybe I won't share the slides, but I'll let you navigate your own way there. So just a reminder on slide 16 of what our journey looks like. So we'll have one more session like this, but with a slightly different group of hosts on the morning of the 31st next week, and exploring a few different questions to help us begin well together. And then on the November 29th, we'll start that first cycle focused on theories of transformation for our work. It will be in a North and South American and Europe and African friendly time zone, and not so much for Asia and Penny's part of the world, but we will record them so that people can stay involved. The second cycle will start in that's focused on what we were just talking about, really, the capacities and competencies and the inner and outer work. That will start probably in February. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And that will be in a New Zealand friendly time zone, as well as here where we are here in North America with Maggie and I. So there's a couple links on slide 17 to take you to the places you might want to go. There's an email contact for us. There's the website where we think everything lives. So if you take one link, just take that one. There's a place to register for this. It is action and applied research. So that takes you to a consent form, but that's a good way for us to get your contact information if you know that you're interested in participating in future cycles. There's a spot to register for the next conversation next week, and then the medium space. And so we invite you to join us in whatever ways feel good for you, and hope to see you soon in an upcoming discussion. And thanks for those of you who contributed to our dialogue today too. We'll say farewell, and feel free to hang out a little bit longer if anyone has any other questions. Thanks, everybody.